Well, my name's Troy Walters. I'm pretty much a man of many hobbies. Photography is one of my hobbies, as well as metal detecting, as well as electronics, vintage video cameras, and many, many other things. My main hobby is film photography. I started 5 years ago. I started with Super 8 film. I learnt about a process of making your own developer using coffee, vitamin C and washing soda. That was my introduction to film photography. Then I worked with still films and that's where it began. And then I proceeded with colour photography, using colour film and colour developer. I actually got into shooting vintage film because I know how to make it work by simply overexposing it more than its box speed rating. A lot of them films are cross-processable in modern chemistry. And so, yeah, I shoot lots of vintage film, both colour and black and white, cross-process them in available chemistry or the coffee developer. And yeah, I do a lot of creative work with my film photography, landscapes, model sets. My other hobby is metal detecting. Yeah, I'm interested in looking for old coins and old relics from the distant past, and I go all over the Illawarra looking for potential sites to metal detect. I pick areas where there used to be old houses, really old parks, and places that have history to it. And yeah, I go for a swing around there and look for old stuff. How I pick my areas is looking at vintage aerial photography that's available online of the Illawarra. There's old aerial photography from 1938 up to today of the Illawarra, and that's how I know where there used to be buildings and historical areas and such. The ground may look pretty on top, but underneath it's very polluted. Anyway, shall I go on about Helen?
I'm Helen Hamilton from Port Kembla. I was born in Port Kembla and lived here most of my life. I know Troy from when he was quite young. His family have been good friends with me. I lived here in Port Kembla when the copper smelter was here. You couldn't open your windows in summer to let the breeze in. You couldn't have a barbecue. There was trees planted down both sides of the street that don't exist anymore because trees just wouldn't survive here. And then what tipped me over the top finally was I had my granddaughter in my arms out the front, and somehow or other she ended up with a burn on the top of her head, and she's only 8 months old. And a friend of mine came up to work down at the copper smelter and said, "That's an acid burn." And I went and got my top, and here was all the marks on my top that I'd had on where I was nursing her that morning. So that tipped me over the top and got me into the stepped up my action with the public outcry that was going on here. We had a group called I.R.A.T.E, Residents Against the Smelter, and we eventually became I.R.A.T.E, Illawarra Residents Against Toxic Environments. And we began our lessons in life as to dealing with governments and big multinational companies. But we had monthly meetings that were started here, which were run by council and that, but they've dropped out now. I run those meetings, and we still have them 30 years down the track. But all of that all the public meetings led to, they needed somebody to take the legal action that didn't have a job and didn't have a house to lose. And I went, I'm on a disabled pension, and I live with my mum. And they said, "Good, we'll have you." So that was a bit scary because I was rather quiet and shy and everything. And so things just moved on from there. And I thought, well, I've just opened my mouth and everybody wants me in the community to stand up for them. So I couldn't back out. So I just had to tough it up and get going, which was a big lesson on its own. I was writing letters by hand. I eventually got a computer and learnt to do them on the computer and things like that. Learnt to take videos, and we'd all ring round when something was happening, and we'd go up to the old school up there and take photos because you had to have evidence, and sometimes the smoke up the street wasn't enough evidence because it didn't say what was in the smoke. So we were up against so much, and when we finally got to court up in Sydney, that was a shock because 10 o'clock the night before, the government that I was taking to court put a bill through Parliament that invalidated any results from the court. So that was rather a shock. So we got out as much information out that morning as we could. And then my barrister went on to do a big freedom of information case, which now helps the media and everything to get information that they couldn't get before. So there's been lots of benefits from what happened. And we then just pressured the EPA, who were toothless tigers at the time, and we got them to do their job properly down at the smelter, and the company eventually realised that they couldn't keep up with their licence conditions, and that's when they eventually folded. But we went through hell in between time. I ended up dropped on the footpath one day putting my garbage bin out on the side of the road, and my little granddaughter rang her mother, who was a paramedic, and we had to then ring back and say I'd recovered and come back inside. But the sulphur fumes were just terrible. They just hit you and drop. I did a chapter in a book, so I learnt from... I'd never been to uni or anything. I learned how to do that, and it was just a big learning curve. The smokestack stood there for ages. They said it only had a 30-year life, and we pointed out railway bridges and things that are a lot 1930s in Port Kembla, but it didn't work. Anyway, someone wanted to retain it and make a play area out of it and that, sightseeing and all that, but eventually we had to go up. When they were doing that, it was to come down in the December, and we had to go to Sydney and tell the minister that he wasn't complying by the Australian regulations, and it got stopped, and it didn't come down till the February then when they put the security areas out further.